Welcome to the Steel Curtain Podcast. It's Monday, October 21st, and the Pittsburgh Steelers are 5-2 after a 37-15 win over the New York Jets in Week 7 of the 2024 NFL season at the stadium formerly named after a ketchup bottle. Hi, I'm Josh Yourish, and today I'm going to react to Pittsburgh's win and their 5-2 start, talk about Najee Harris's resurgence in Arthur Smith's offense, and evaluate the playoff ceiling for the Steelers. But first, I have to admit I was a little bit wrong about Russell Wilson. Mostly. I was mostly wrong about Russell Wilson. Last week I told you the Steelers offense would not be functional with Russell Wilson at quarterback compared to what it was with Justin Fields at quarterback. It was functional. It put up 37 points in a blowout win over the lowly, now 2-5 Jets with Aaron Rodgers, and maybe he just needs to trade for Randall Cobb or bring in Eddie Lacy or any other old Packers. Maybe Mark McCarthy can leave Dallas and go be the Jets coach, because getting the band back together with Davante Adams didn't fix things for Aaron Rodgers and the Jets. Russell Wilson, however, kind of got his mojo back. I was thinking about this game, like Sunday Night Football, Aaron Rodgers, Russell Wilson in 2015. That game would be a banger. That'd be such a great game. In 2024, it's kind of a different situation, but it was still interesting. We still learned a lot about these teams and saw a really impressive performance from Russell Wilson. Not what I expected to be saying on Monday morning, and especially after how things started for Wilson. He was completely inaccurate. He looked incredibly rusty. He looked skittish in the pocket, which didn't really change. And he missed a couple of throws really, really badly early on. There were boos at Acrisure Stadium, and then the boos intensified after another 3-and-out. The Steelers did score a field goal on their first possession, but then it got really ugly for Russell Wilson in the offense, and then it wasn't ugly anymore. And then a moon ball to George Pickens unlocked everything, and everyone is in love with Russell Wilson and the moon balls. It was a good start. Let's talk about if it's for real. Let's talk about if it's sustainable. So Russell Wilson, the most passing yards in a Steelers debut in franchise history. He finished 16 for 29 for 264 yards and 2 touchdowns. No turnover-worthy plays per PFF, which is really important in a Mike Tomlin offense, because he does not want that quarterback to turn that ball over. Just 1 sack, another thing really important. I didn't know how he was going to survive behind the offensive line. My critique of going to Russell Wilson, and even the thought of it, because it wasn't finalized when I talked to you last Monday, was even for the good things Russ can still do, can he do them behind an offensive line that also lost Zach Frazier? So last night, the offensive line, Dan Moore Jr., Isaac Seumalo, Ryan McCollum, McCormick at right guard, and Broderick Jones, who is awful and maybe getting worse at right tackle. That is not a very functional NFL offensive line, and yet Russell Wilson made it work. Just the 1 sack. Also had a rushing touchdown on the QB sneak after Beanie Bishop's second interception of the game. That was nearly a pick six, if not for the chase down tackle by Davante Adams. Wilson hit plays of 44, 39, 11 for a touchdown, and a 40-yard defensive pass interference to George Pickens. Pickens finished with 5 catches for 111 yards and a touchdown. Pickens seemed excited about this news. He's the one who broke the news that Russell Wilson was starting after Mike Tomlin said, "We're not going to tell them. We don't want the Jets to know who to prepare for. Like this is high school or something." And then 30 minutes later, George Pickens revealed in the locker room to the press that Russell Wilson would be making his first start. Maybe he was just excited. Maybe it wasn't a slip up. He just couldn't wait to have a quarterback back there who's going to take a lot of deep shots to him, even when he's covered, right? And I don't know that squeaky wheel gets the grease is a great long-term strategy for a player like George Pickens, who was not giving full effort against the Cowboys and was looking like he had 1 foot out of town at one point this season. Last night, he looked like a superstar. I don't know if placating your unhappy stars is really a great long-term franchise strategy, but it's what happened. And for now, it looks like George Pickens is very happy with this offense. And it looks like this offense is a bit more explosive, a bit more dynamic with Russell Wilson. We just have to figure out if it was fool's gold or if this was something real. So even amidst that slow start, Wilson's impact was immediately felt on the offense. You could see it just even watching the TV copy, right? A lot of this is you want to go back and see where the receivers open. You're not seeing that on the TV. Was this quarterback turning down throws? You're not seeing that on the TV. Watching the game live, you immediately saw a difference at the line of scrimmage because Russell Wilson, who is over a decade veteran that's won a Super Bowl in the NFL, he has the freedom to change the play at the line of scrimmage. That's something Justin Fields and reporters asked Arthur Smith about this, or asked Justin Fields about this rather, if he had the ability to audible at the line of scrimmage. And he basically said, if a run play is called, we're running the run play. That's not the case with Russell Wilson. You could tell that right away. He was very vocal at the line of scrimmage. He sounded like a veteran. It was a level of confidence from a quarterback, a veteran quarterback, that the Steelers haven't seen since Ben. That's valuable. Like, that's not just, a loud cadence from a quarterback. That's actually important to the confidence of the offense first. It got rid of a lot of the pre-snap penalties that the Steelers have been seeing and some of the snap issues, things like that. And it also gets you into the right play more often than not. That was really valuable. That control is really valuable. And it enabled Wilson to attack when he saw one-on-one with George Pickens on the outside. He saw those opportunities to take a shot. He got into that play and took the shot. Not every time was it an audible, but that's an ability he has that Fields doesn't, that Fields isn't really given. So it's kind of not a fair comparison, but given or earned, right? Maybe that's the difference. And maybe Justin Fields hasn't earned that level of confidence from the coaching staff. Also, as things got going, and we saw this right away, his first completion as a Steeler, the play action game really sprung to life. Justin Fields provides a nice floor with his rushing ability, and that is the main reason I wanted him to stay in this offense, because I was so worried about what things would look like with this offensive line and with these receivers. But if you can get the play action game going, and Russell Wilson did, then the offense has a similar level, maybe not a similar floor of competency on a down-to-down basis, but it has the ability to tap into these explosives that Fields was not hitting. His first completion was that play action to the flat to Darnell Washington that got a big catch and run. They went back to that play, got another big catch and run. They kept spamming it even once the Jets figured it out and tackled Washington for a short gain. With play action, which was used on 13 of Wilson's 31 dropbacks, which is 42%, Wilson went 9 for 12 for 157 yards, 13.1 yards per attempt, which is huge and excellent and a really good sign for this offense. A 7.1 yard average depth of target, 3.29 second time to throw. Play action plays are going to take longer. He was getting the ball out of his hands when he saw the ability to, saw the receivers open. He was giving receivers a chance down the field more than Fields was, right? Wilson knows that NFL windows are very tight. And when you have great players like a George Pickens, even like a Pat Freiermuth, they can separate at the catch point. They don't need to be open. You can just throw it to them anyways, right? And that really helped in this play action passing game, because Fields in play action, it was play action, eyes up, eyes down, check down, right? He wasn't seeing guys come wide open, so he wasn't going to throw. And he didn't like turning his back to the defense. Russell Wilson was able to do that very well. Fields with play action this year, just for comparison, 31% of his dropbacks, so 11% fewer. He's 29 for 45 for 233 yards, 5.2 yards per attempt compared to 13.1 for Russ, 4.9 yard average depth of target compared to 7.1 for Russ, and 3.56 second time to throw compared to 3.29 seconds for Russ. So it's quicker, it's deeper, it's more aggressive, it's more efficient in the play action passing game. That's something you would maybe expect from Russell Wilson, the veteran coming in, and it played out that way. I do have some doubts about this offense going forward under Russell Wilson, though. I don't think all the problems are fixed, all the problems are solved. We're ready to press ahead and be a Super Bowl contender. I do not have that feeling coming out of last night's win over the Jets. There are reasons to maybe have that type of optimism. I've never had that about this Steelers team, and I'm not going to overreact to one performance that in some ways may have been fluky, may have been fool's gold. So let's look at those potential reasons that this may not be what we're going to get every week out of Russell Wilson. This may not be the new sustainable offense for the Steelers. First, the Jets defense came in without DJ Reed at cornerback, who is the counterpoint to Sauce Gardner on the other side. Sauce Gardner, back-to-back All-Pros as a rookie and second-year player in his third year, a lockdown corner, one of the best in the NFL. DJ Reed's just about as good and maybe was playing even better this year, and he was out. Michael Carter in the nickel, he was out. Chuck Clark at safety, he was out. They lost Sauce Gardner for a stretch. He ended up playing 54 snaps, which is the tied for the most of a Jets cornerback, so he was back fairly quickly. And they lost safety lost safety Ashton Davis early on in the game. Wilson also completed 55% of his passes against this very depleted secondary. And we saw some of those coverage busts late in the game that you would have when you have 5 defensive backs out, right? The Calvin Austin throw at the end that sealed the franchise debut yardage record for Russell Wilson and helped seal the game as well. That play action crosser, the only throw that was remotely downfield between the numbers for Russell Wilson, because that area of the field is still not being tapped. We knew coming into the year it wasn't going to be with either of these quarterbacks. Russell Wilson does not throw over the middle of the field well, does not like to do it at all, did not do it at all last night. That play action crosser is like the traditional Arthur Smith stuff. They got to it late in the game, and it was really just a huge coverage bust because that secondary was so depleted. So even against that group, Wilson completed just 55% of his passes. Not great because of a really rusty start, right? He started 1 for 1, and then he was 1 for 7 after that on his next 8 throws for, I think, 4 yards. So it was really ugly early on. We can attribute a lot of that to rust. But even for the game, he had a negative 5% completion percentage over expectation. That's basically saying how accurate you are as a thrower relative to the guys you have open, relative to the types of throws you're trying to make. So there was a lot of inaccuracy, not a lot of great throws from Russ. And even on some of those deep balls to George Pickens, the first one was a good throw. Some are saying it was badly underthrown and a poor throw. Some are saying it was the perfect throw because it gave Pickens a chance to fight back to the ball, and he didn't have any downfield separation, so you throw him back. I'm not sure on those deep shots. Sometimes it's really hard to tell. Sometimes it's just you're throwing it up, receivers going under it, you're giving them a chance. Wilson gave him a chance on that throw. So if we're saying good or bad, put it in the good bucket, right? Pickens made a one-handed catch. Maybe should have been pass interference as well. Was able to come down with it. Quarterback gave him a chance. He made a play. Pretty good throw. Later, on another one of the deep shots to Pickens, that he basically had to pull off the defender's helmet because it was so badly underthrown. Pickens still had a chance. He juggled it and was eventually able to make the catch. That was a bad throw. The one with defensive pass interference was a Joe Flacco throw, right? Deep shot, underthrow it, receiver fights back, get defensive pass interference. And I'm not even saying that as a criticism. I think that's one of the best plays in football is the underthrown deep ball. There are a lot of good things that can happen when you take those contested shots down the field. Russell Wilson knows when to take them. He's a fairly effective thrower when doing that. And the Steelers got a lot of positive regression on the deep shots. Because if you think back to the beginning of the season, Justin Fields was throwing some deep shots too. There was the one against Denver when he was rolling out right. Broderick Jones had the holding call. He hit Pickens for that 50-something yard completion. That's the best throw any Steelers quarterback has made all year. Pickens had other deep shots that were called back from penalties. He had deep shots to Pickens that Pickens didn't haul in. So there's randomness with these deep shots. It's helpful to an offense when it works out, when it goes your way. The Steelers should be taking 4, 5, 6 of them every night, maybe not all of them to Pickens, but every game they should be taking those shots. Russell Wilson was willing to do that. So that is a plus in his column. That is a pro for playing Russell Wilson. You're just not going to have it play out that way every time. The Steelers scored 37 points, 31 of them unanswered. But it was an offense that was heavily reliant on those big plays to Pickens, those contested catches. Fields took those early in the year. Pickens didn't haul them in. You could credit that to Wilson's catchable moon ball, right? Everyone is freaking out about the moon ball still. Moon balls are super fun. But there's a lot of randomness in a very high variance play. And it's not like he was doing it a lot. Not as much as we feel, because so many of them worked out, right? He only had 4 attempts over 20 plus yards downfield, and 2 of them were complete, and 1 was a defensive pass interference. So it feels like he is taking shots all over the place. That wasn't really the case. They just worked out a lot. So we remember them. And the offense that scored those 37 points, 31 unanswered, was also aided by 2 huge Beanie Bishop interceptions. One of them set up the team at the 1 yard line, which was essentially just a defensive score. Wilson, the QB sneak, got it in. While the game was still in doubt, right? Because some of those 37 points, the touchdown at the end, was just the Jets had essentially phoned it in. They were done. They were a beaten team. That's a credit to the Steelers for beating them, but they didn't care if Najee Harris scored that last touchdown or not, right? So while the game was still in doubt, it seemed like the Steelers really missed Justin Fields' legs in the red zone. And I'm not calling for Fields to come back in. You have to stick with Russ after this performance, and we have to get more data points on what the offense looks like with Russ. Because we have a very good one. We had some very good ones with Justin Fields early on. Well, we have some not so good ones. We have to find that out. But it seemed like they really missed Fields' legs in the red zone. That was his primary utility. And there were some reports that there was going to be a Justin Fields package on Sunday night. There was not. We did not see him for a snap. I wouldn't hate working him in the red zone. He's a huge threat there. Eventually, Russell Wilson threw that touchdown to Van Jefferson in the red zone late in the game. And that was a nice play, but it was, it was a pick play. You had man coverage. You got the right coverage. The pick worked well. Didn't call offensive pass interference for it. And it was a good throw from Russell Wilson. That's not going to happen all the time. You need something you can really lean on in the red zone. And early in the game, they were forced to punt from the 3 yard line, or to kick a field goal from the 3 yard line, rather, because they miss Justin Fields' mobility around the goal line. It's incredibly valuable to have a quarterback that can, when he doesn't see it in the tight windows in the red zone, when you don't have somebody break open right away, okay, we have a 225, 230 pounder at 6'4" who runs a 4.3 and can just run somebody over into the end zone. That's super valuable. I'd like to see it worked in a little bit. This is Russell Wilson's team right now, but I'd like to see it worked in a little bit. I think they'll start to miss that later in the season when some of the deep shots aren't coming up and hitting as consistently. You need to keep Russell Wilson as QB1, right? He earned it with this performance. The freedom that Arthur Smith and Mike Tomlin allow him at the line of scrimmage is super valuable. His ability to execute the play action passing game is incredibly valuable for this offense. It probably let Arthur Smith breathe a deep sigh of relief because he loves running the play action passing game. And when it's working with a quarterback like Russell Wilson, when it wasn't working with Justin Fields, Arthur Smith had to be loving that. And he had a lot of nice things to say about Justin Fields this week after Russell Wilson was given the job. But you have to keep Russell Wilson in there because he's giving you these things. His willingness to take those deep shots, even when they're contested, even with tight coverage. That's very valuable to this team, especially a team that the best offensive player is George Pickens, who is his best ability is catching those deep contested balls. That's very valuable, but there are still big flaws in his game that will be exposed against better teams with healthier secondaries. Under pressure, Wilson was pressured on 41.9% of his dropbacks. That's a lot because this offensive line is not good. That's not going to change. He went 4 for 11 for 114 yards, so he did hit some big shots with one scramble for 1 yard. You're not getting anything out of the QB run game anymore, out of the scramble game anymore. And he looked really good, really healthy, was able to move around, hit dump offs, hit checkdowns. Will that continue? Will the offense be functional if you're not hitting the deep shots? Because they had a lot of problems on third down, especially early in the game when it was still in doubt. I think they started 0 for 7 or 0 for 8 on third down. This is not Russell Wilson's back. We're heading to the Super Bowl. Buy the tickets. This is the offense looked different. It looked exciting with a couple of deep shots. We should be cautiously optimistic. Russell Wilson should be the quarterback going forward. And to that, I'll admit I was very wrong. I thought it was going to look like what it did in the first quarter for the entire game. But I'm still not sold that Russell Wilson will be the Steelers quarterback in week 8. I'm still not sold that Russell Wilson will be the Steelers quarterback in week 18. And that's what ultimately matters, because I question how sustainable this is against Baltimore, against Kansas City, against Philadelphia, and if the defense can slow down Washington and Cincinnati. So this is a 5-2 start. This is a great performance from Russell Wilson, but he and this team may be a bit of fool's gold right now. Even if you pencil in wins against the Giants, and we're going to take a look later in the show at the ceiling of this team, right? What can the ceiling of the Pittsburgh Steelers look like? We'll get into that, but even if you pencil in wins over the Giants next week and 2 over the Browns, who fell to 1-6 this past week, that only gets you to 8 wins, right? And I feel comfortable at this point penciling those wins in. So that gets the Steelers to 8. Giants, 2 against the Browns. So for 10 and likely a playoff spot, because that's probably going to get you in with 7 playoff teams, you need to go at least 2-5 against Baltimore twice, Cincinnati twice, Kansas City, Washington, and Philly to be a real contender and not be the 7th seed and have to play Baltimore again or Buffalo or even Houston as the 2 seed, whichever of those teams comes out there, maybe even Kansas City. You got to go 3-4, maybe even 4-3 against that group. It's possible, but I wouldn't call it likely. And that's with 2 assumed wins over Cleveland, who will get better without Deshaun Watson, who tore his Achilles yesterday. Those are division games. Those are not easy games to win. And that team could be a lot tougher to play with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who has beaten the Steelers and beat the Steelers last year, or Jameis Winston at quarterback. The Browns went on a playoff run when Deshaun Watson went out last year and Joe Flacco came in. That's still possible for that talented roster. Now, it's not as good. They traded away Amari Cooper, right? And it seems like they have hit rock bottom. But even if you assume those 2 wins, you got to get some wins against some really good teams. Steelers fans should feel great right now. And at 5-2 with 2 viable options at quarterback, you should feel great. They do feel great. They should feel great. And I want to feel great. And if you listen to this show, you know I'm on the pessimistic, realistic side. I say realistic. Many would say pessimistic side. I don't feel great. I feel cautiously optimistic. But this is how the season was supposed to play out. To those of you that feel great, this was the only possible plan to get into the playoffs, was a hot start. This is how the schedule was laid out for the Steelers. So maybe temper the optimism a little bit. Don't start planning the Super Bowl parade yet. Don't start buying your Russell Wilson jerseys yet. Because December is when we learn what this football team really is. Tomlin knows that if he wins the turnover battle and his team runs the ball well, which it is doing, he can beat the bad teams. And that's what the Jets are. So the floor is incredibly high for this talented roster. But we don't know what the ceiling is, especially on offense. And maybe a 37-point performance against the Jets is it. And if it is, I'm not sure that the way they played on Sunday night against New York will be good enough to beat Patrick Mahomes or Lamar Jackson in December or even January. And that's what matters for this and every team in the AFC for the foreseeable future. But it's still a good step in the right direction. And before we go any further, let me tell you about Underdog Fantasy because it's the greatest time of the year. I said, Steelers fans, you feel great. Maybe you should feel great. I feel less great, but it's always great when football is on. It's the best time of the year. Football's back. It's here till February. Hopefully the Steelers are too. Win up to 1,000 times your money just by choosing higher or lower on your favorite player's stats. For example, passing touchdowns, passing yards, rushing yards. You can do that with Underdog Fantasy. I really like Underdog Fantasy. It's just another way to get involved in the games on Sundays, right? Steelers played Sunday Night Football. You have your fantasy team to watch out for during the day. Maybe you placed a few wagers on other sites, but also you can have Underdog Fantasy outside of your drafted year-long fantasy team. Maybe you don't like the matchups. Maybe a good player's on a bye. You can do all of that. You can get the good matchups that you want. You can back your favorite players. You can fade a player you don't like by picking higher or lower on your favorite player stats with Underdog Fantasy. Making picks on Underdog is straightforward and signing up is even easier. Just head over to Underdog's simple to use mobile app or underdogfantasy.com. Sign up with promo code STILLCURTAIN. That's STILLCURTAIN. And Underdog will give you a free pick to use on your first cash pick'em entry, plus up to $1,000 in bonus cash when you deposit. That's Underdog Fantasy, promo code STILLCURTAIN to claim your new customer special of a free pick and your deposit offer. Must be 18 plus, 21 plus in Massachusetts and Arizona, 19 plus in Alabama and Nebraska, and present in a state where Underdog Fantasy operates. Terms apply. Void in Colorado. Concerned with your play? Call 1-800-GAMBLER or visit www.ncpgambling.org. Arizona 1-800-NEXT-STEP, 1-800-639-8783, or text NEXT STEP to 53342. New York, call the 24/7 Hope line at 1-877-8-HOPE-NY or text HOPE-NY 467-369. And now, back to these Pittsburgh Steelers, because the Pittsburgh Steelers found something of an interesting old school identity in the past couple of weeks, right? They're blowing teams out. The Steelers haven't done that in a while. Back-to-back 2-score wins with over 30 points. That has not been the Steelers situation in a long time. So maybe this team is better than I'm giving it credit for, because even when they made the playoffs last year, they weren't winning games like this except for against Cincinnati late in the year. And that was Cincinnati without Joe Burrow. That was the New York Jets with Aaron Rodgers, and they pounded them. And I don't think the Jets are great, but they pounded them. And one of the reasons that the Steelers have this interesting identity is because sometimes running backs and safeties still matter, right? These are devalued positions in the NFL. You can throw linebackers in there as well. But in terms of the long-term expensive contracts that these positions are getting, those have decreased over the past few years and several years, and will continue to decrease in a lot of situations, especially at running back. Yet, Najee Harris and Deshaun Elliott could be the Steelers' most important players on each side of the ball so far this season. And for Najee Harris, that's maybe more in the past couple of weeks in very small samples. But when they're playing best, those two are arguably their best players. And I know that's saying a lot because that defense is loaded. Deshaun Elliott is incredible. Beanie Bishop had the 2 interceptions last night, but Elliott also made huge plays. It felt like every time the Jets had some momentum in the second half, Elliott was there to make a huge hit, make a big tackle. He's been better than Minkah Fitzpatrick this year. What a great signing in the offseason by Omar Khan. And even Beanie Bishop, another excellent undrafted free agent signing who is starting to play well. He's played very poor in certain performances. Against the Colts, he was terrible. They attacked him that entire game. Last night, he was really good. 2 interceptions. One of them was a drop from Garrett Wilson that bounced off his chest. But if you look closely on that video, it looks like Bishop deflected it a little bit when he was playing kind of the underneath coverage and then turned and hauled it in. Really great plays. Really important player. But Elliott, to me, is the most important player in that secondary. He has been lights out. And that's super important, right? You need guys like that, free agent signings that you didn't expect, to play better than they did in other places. That's what you need to take the next step, right? In team building, most teams that are stuck in the middle, well, their best path to the top is via the bottom, right? You bottom out, you get a quarterback, you reload on some picks. Okay, you're back at the top again. That's how the NFL is set up. The Steelers will not bottom out. They don't want to philosophically, and this roster is too good to even consider that. So, all right, how are you going to get to the top? Well, hitting on a quarterback would help. Maybe they did. But also savvy free agent signings like Deshaun Elliott coming to town and exceeding what you paid for them, what the expectations were. That's how you raise your ceiling. And we're going to talk about the ceiling of this team in the next segment. Another way you do it is by players who were potentially going to be cast-offs getting in a better offensive system and developing into what you hoped they could be. And right now, that might be Najee Harris' situation. I have been part of the Najee Harris haters club, whatever that is. I have not thought he is a very good player. I hated the pick when it happened. I hated the pick regardless of what I thought of Najee Harris as a player. Philosophically, I do not agree with drafting running backs in the first round. I don't think it makes much sense unless you're doing it. I mean, they did it near the end, so it's not terrible. But if you're going to do that, you better have a game-breaking player. I never really saw that with Najee Harris, and we never have seen that in the NFL. He's not somebody who can hit breakaway runs. He's not somebody who can meaningfully outplay his circumstances, right? And that's what you need to justify a first-round pick at running back. You need a player who can meaningfully outperform their circumstances. And what do I mean by circumstances? I mean their offensive line and their scheme. So you think in San Francisco or any Shanahan, Kyle, or Mike Shanahan coach teams since the 90s, you have this outside zone system that is so running back friendly. If you have a fast running back who can get to the edge, one cut, hit the hole, you're going to excel. That's why Terrell Davis is in the Hall of Fame. And he was an undrafted player out of Georgia. That is part of your circumstance. And also part of your circumstance is the offensive line. Even Saquon Barkley, who I think was probably the best running back prospect since Adrian Peterson and maybe even before that, couldn't outperform his circumstances in New York because the offensive line was too bad, right? He didn't have the scheme. He didn't have the offensive line. The Steelers don't have the offensive line right now. Maybe they have a really good scheme with Arthur Smith. It's hard to say that when he keeps running these pitches to the outside that do not work, are not blocked well. Partially that's because of the offensive line, but chicken or the egg, can't really unravel that. Najee Harris, regardless, is outperforming his circumstances the past 2 weeks. It's the best football he's played since he's been in the NFL. And it's not close. And a lot of it is because of Arthur Smith helping to nudge his circumstances in the right direction. I mentioned how depleted the offensive line is, right? Ryan McCollum at center. Zach Frazier's been so good. And they even lost him. And the running game was still effective. It was still viable last night. The beginning of the year, it was not because it was all zone runs for Najee Harris. He is not a zone run running back. He does not have the speed to get to the edge. He does not have the vision to pick the hole as the outside zone blocking scheme moves as one and a seam's going to come open. You got to pick it. If Najee Harris sidesteps in the backfield, we even saw it last night a bunch of times. If he sidesteps at all, if there's any indecision at all, he's done. He's going to be dropped for a short gain or a loss. But if you run a gap scheme, a power running scheme system, which Arthur Smith has leaned into with Najee Harris, he's adapted to with Najee Harris, you can get the best out of him. His two highest yards after contact performances of this season have come in the past 2 weeks against Vegas and against New York. Against Vegas, 86 yards after contact. Against New York, 72. That's what you want. He's outperforming his circumstances, right? The blocking is not great, but Najee's making it a moot point. He's running incredibly hard. He's breaking a ton of tackles. He has these games, occasionally we've seen them in other years, where you just can't tackle Najee, and every time he's brought down, it's because his forward progress was finally stopped. There was one last night where there were 7 different Jets trying to bring him down and couldn't, and eventually, after the whistle had blown, he spun out of it, and if the whistle hadn't been blown, maybe he would have had a big touchdown. Maybe they would have brought him to the ground, but regardless, he just has these games where you cannot tackle him. If the Steelers keep getting this version of Najee Harris, that is huge for their offense because they're pressed for playmakers. They don't have a ton of them. I never factored Najee Harris in as being a meaningful playmaker for this offense because he hasn't been in his prior 3 years, and I didn't think he'd be a fit for the zone running scheme. He's not in the zone running scheme anymore because Arthur Smith has adapted, which is very important to an offense to have a coach on the sideline who's competent enough to say something's not working, but this might. Arthur Smith brings that. Matt Canada did not. So his circumstances got better, but he's still outperforming them because the offensive line is such a problem. And Jaylen Warren now, last night we saw him a little bit. He's finally reemerging as a playmaker too. He's finally getting healthy. Steelers don't have enough weapons at wide receiver. But if Harris and Warren are impact running backs who outperform the woes of this offensive line, that could change the outlook for this team going forward. That could change the outlook for this offense going forward. You marry that with the Russell Wilson passing game, with the willingness to take deep shots to George Pickens. Okay, maybe you really have something, right? And it seems like they're trending in that direction. Cautious optimism is what I prescribe. But I understand if you're starting to let the caution go, caution to the wind. I'm optimistic. I'm not, but I understand if you are because there are a lot of reasons to be with this team, with this offense, even regardless of who's quarterback, because the running game is now functional. And that's another reason I said the Steelers can't get rid of Justin Fields. He was the reason their running game was functional. Now Najee Harris is. And that allows you to go to Russell Wilson, who is seemingly unlocking the downfield passing game. All right. The ceiling's raising. The ceiling is raising. How high? Well, let's figure that out. Do the Steelers have a Super Bowl ceiling? No. They still don't, because they don't have that franchise quarterback that's going to go toe-to-toe with Mahomes. It's going to go toe-to-toe with Josh Allen, with Lamar Jackson. It's possible that this team could maybe clip one of those teams in an early round to get through the AFC. The AFC is down this year, but with the gauntlet of quarterbacks that are in the AFC, I don't see any world in which they get through it. Right? In the NFC, maybe you don't need that elite quarterback. We've seen Brock Purdy get there. We might see Jared Goff get there. Last year, the NFC Championship game was Brock Purdy and Jared Goff. And Jared Goff is now entering sub-elite world as a quarterback. He's been amazing this season, and he's incredibly accurate and poised in the pocket. He's not on Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson Island as the elite quarterbacks of the NFL. Steelers don't have that player either. I think you need that player to be a true Super Bowl contender. If you're not overwhelmingly talented on both sides of the ball, like the San Francisco 49ers or the Detroit Lions before the Aiden Hutchinson injury, that's going to derail their season a bit this year. But you're moving up in the AFC hierarchy, higher than I probably thought this team was going to get this year. So right now, let's look at the AFC playoff picture, because right now the Steelers are 5-2. And the Chiefs are number 1 in the conference at 6-0. Texans are number 2 at 5-2. Steelers are right there at number 3 at 5-2. Bills, number 4, 5-2. The Steelers are leading the AFC North over the Baltimore Ravens, who are 4-2 in the 5-spot. Chargers and the Colts. Just behind that group, the Broncos are 8th in the conference at 4-3. The Bengals are 9th. The Dolphins are 10th. Then the Raiders, Jets, Jaguars, Titans, Browns, Patriots. That group can pretty much wash them away. The Dolphins, you can wash them away. To me, it looks like 9, right? Bengals, Broncos, Colts, Chargers, Ravens, Bills, Steelers, Texans, Chiefs. That's where your playoff teams are going to come from in the AFC, at least from the look of things now, unless Aaron Rodgers really reaches back into the past and pulls something out. So how high is the ceiling for the Steelers? I posed this idea before the season, and maybe the overwhelming influx of talent from Omar Khan's last 2 drafts would raise the ceiling of this team, right? I loved how he drafted the past 2 seasons, his first 2 drafts as the Steelers general manager. And the strange thing is that a few of those players are having big impacts. Joey Porter Jr., Keanu Benton, Peyton Wilson, Zach Frazier. But we haven't seen huge impacts from much of those draft classes, right? Roman Wilson, Troy Fautanu, they pretty much haven't seen the field at all. 1st and 3rd round picks this year. Broderick Jones, we haven't seen a good version of him since last season. Yet this team is still 5-2. The bigger upgrades weren't just the overall talent of this roster, which is, I thought, their route out of mediocrity, right? Just overwhelm it with great draft picks and good signings, and you can elevate the ceiling. No. It's that the upgrades at offensive coordinator and quarterback were so substantial that this is now a real playoff team, not a fake one like last year. Whatever you think of Fields and Russ, they're both huge upgrades from Kenny Pickett. That's inarguable. Arthur Smith has proven himself to be a massive upgrade over Matt Canada, not just for like what his scheme is at the heart of it, right? With zone run and play action off of it. His ability to adjust to the strengths of Justin Fields, using his legs in the red zone, playing him more from shotgun than Russell Wilson did last night, and then ability to adjust to what Russell Wilson does well, getting back to that play action. Whatever you think of those quarterbacks, they're huge upgrades. Whatever you think of Arthur Smith, he's a huge upgrade to a team that made the playoffs last year. So even with injuries on the offensive side of the ball, there's a level of competence that's been missing for 2 years. And I think it's possible that myself and others got so caught up in what Fields and Russ are as a long-term answer at quarterback, because that's meaningful on the huge macro of winning a Super Bowl, that I missed how big and how important that upgrade possibly was. Now, I'm not even saying this team's going to win 12 games. I think it's still possible and likely that they finish the year with 10 wins. But it feels a lot more real than it did last season when they finished with 10 wins and snuck into the playoffs. So Mike Tomlin's defense, despite its mostly outdated reliance on cover 3 and lack of diversity in the pass rush, can dominate on sheer talent. While the offense, despite its depleted offensive line and lack of wide receiver talent, can succeed either by Fields' rushing ability or Wilson's downfield aggressiveness, and Smith's understanding of the run game and play action and his ability to adapt to the strengths of this roster. So maybe I missed how meaningful those additions were because I was evaluating them compared to the rest of the NFL, right? Do they have a top half quarterback? No. They don't have one of the 16 best quarterbacks in the NFL on their roster. Did they get a hell of a lot better at that position? Absolutely. Do they have an offensive innovator who's going to change the game and get a head coaching job again? No. Did they get competence at offensive coordinator when they haven't had it for a long time? Yeah. The Steelers made the playoffs with Pickett, Trubisky, and Mason Rudolph with Matt Canada calling plays for most of last season. So maybe they could win a playoff game. maybe they could even win 2, and that's not something I had considered at all in the preseason. It's possible. I wouldn't call it likely, but the 5-2 start opens the door to that. And that's not something I saw coming. So you look at the playoff picture there, right? Chiefs, Texans, then the Steelers right at number 3. Where are they from a power ranking perspective? Because the records are different. There are different circumstances, injuries, bad performances, fluky performances. So if we power rank the AFC, where does that leave the Steelers? Okay, I did it. Back of the napkin, quick power rankings. I'm not digging into this so much, but to me, this is the top 5. Right? You're looking at the Chiefs are clearly number 1. Then you have the Ravens, the Bills, the Texans. All of those teams have elite franchise quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, CJ Stroud. I have no question about them at the most important position. I have no question about their offense because of it. That's the most important thing in the playoffs. And they also have good defenses, right? The Chiefs have maybe the best defense in the NFL. I'm not going to worry about the Ravens defense, even though their secondary has some concerns. I think the Bills are good enough on that side of the ball because Sean McDermott is so good at outperforming the amount of talent he has on the defensive side. And then D'Amico Ryans just continues to add talent to a group that was pretty good last year and is better this year. That's the top tier. Then there's a teardrop. Those are the 4 teams in the AFC that I could see winning the Super Bowl. And then there's a teardrop. And then the Pittsburgh Steelers, in my opinion, are at the top of the next tier with the Chargers and the Bengals. The Bengals have a franchise quarterback. The Chargers have a franchise quarterback. Those teams are very close to that next group. The Steelers are in this group for a different reason. Because of the amount of talent they have on the defensive side of the ball, along with a little bit of offensive ingenuity that they haven't had. And just organizational stability altogether with Mike Tomlin, right? Like I'm ready in a lot of ways for the Mike Tomlin era to be over because I just want new ideas. But the stability provides a lot to this franchise, and it's keeping them in this second group. So if you're the 5th best team in the AFC, behind a clear top 4, you theoretically will have to go on the road to play the worst division champ. I have a hard time seeing the Steelers winning that game, whether it be against the Texans, the Bills, the Ravens, or the Chiefs. Even though they're a better team than last year, I still have a hard time seeing them getting out of the first round. The good news, though, is that they're the most well-equipped team in the NFL to sustain a quarterback injury. Right? They don't have an elite quarterback like any of those teams. But if any of those teams lose their main guy, their season's over. For the Steelers, that's not the case. And we learned that on Sunday night. That's the most important thing we learned. The Steelers can win with both guys. Will Russell Wilson win the debate? Will Justin Fields win the debate? I don't think it's over yet. Even with Wilson's great performance, I don't think it's over yet. I think it's possible Fields finishes the season. Regardless, if either guy got hurt, you trust that the other guy can win you a football game. That's really important. Because 2 years ago, the Dolphins went into a playoff game with Skylar Thompson. 2 years ago, the 49ers were on the verge of the Super Bowl against the Eagles, and they lost Brock Purdy, and then they lost his backup. And the NFL changed the rules to have an emergency third quarterback because of it. The Steelers are a bit bulletproof at quarterback. They're not great. They're not great. But they have something that very few playoff teams have. A very, very viable backup that would not be a big drop-off if they went to him. They still have to get there. It's still a long season. It's still going to be a gauntlet in the second half of the year. But if the Steelers got to the playoffs and one of those teams had an injury late in the year, heading into the playoffs, okay, then you might be favored in a road playoff game. and maybe you get through round one, and maybe there's another upset. Maybe the Chargers pull off an upset. Okay, you've already beaten the Chargers. I see a path to winning in the playoffs that I did not see with the Steelers at all until right now, just about right now, when I believe that both of their quarterbacks can win a football game. And so I poked holes in Russell Wilson's performance. I don't think it was great. I think in a lot of ways it might have been fool's gold. 37 points to me was the fool's gold. The defense was responsible for a ton of that. The Jets being in a state of disarray was responsible for a ton of that. And luck on deep passes was responsible for another huge chunk. But it's possible now that the Steelers can be a playoff winner, and that's not how I viewed this team at all coming into the year. They have raised their ceiling, not to a Super Bowl ceiling, but they have raised their ceiling, and that's a great thing. And I could eat all of those words if the Steelers lose at home to the Giants next week on Monday Night Football. They're a 6.5-point home favorite. I'll be back with you on Monday, and I'll be in a previewing role, right? We'll be switching things up a little bit. Usually Tommy and Shane on the midweek Wednesday show, they have a view towards the weekend. They're more your preview here on the Steel Curtain podcast. I'm going to be the preview show. And I hope that you'll be with me for next Monday's show before the Steelers take on the Giants as a 6.5-point home favorite. Steelers are off to a 5-2 start. Cautious optimism is what I prescribe. Have a great week. I'll talk to you next week. And until then, as always, go Steelers.